You know that feeling when you scroll through a flood of shiny listings, each promise of precision cuts and effortless metalwork, only to end up with a machine that sputters, drags, or just doesn't fit in the cramped garage workshop you actually have? That's the exact frustration that sent me digging deeper before I hit buy now. I've talked to a handful of hobby welders, read a few forum threads about their first-time plasma cutter experiences, and even watched a couple of YouTube teardown videos just to see where the rubber meets the road. If you're on the fence because you've seen a lot of hype and a few horror stories, stick around. This review is about to save you from a pricey mistake. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's start with the basics of what a plasma cutter actually does for the everyday maker. The CUT55P by Canon is marketed as a 50 amp IGBT inverter that can slice through steel up to 16 mm thick. In plain English, that means you could take a piece of inch mild steel and, theoretically, cut a clean notch in a single pass. For someone who does occasional fabrications, say, building a custom bike frame, repairing a fence, or fabricating a metal art piece, that capability sounds like a dream. But the real question is whether the machine delivers that promise in a typical home workshop, where power outlets are limited, space is at a premium, and you don't have an industrial-grade air compressor nearby. First, the setup. The CUT55P comes with a compact inverter unit, a handheld torch, and a basic grounding clamp. The inverter itself is about the size of a large shoebox, and it plugs into a standard 120V household outlet. That's a big plus for anyone who doesn't have a 3-phase line or a dedicated 240V circuit. However, there's a hidden trade-off. The unit draws close to its maximum rating when you push it to the 16 mm limit, which can trip a typical 15 amp circuit breaker if you're not careful. In practice, I found that running at the mid-range 810 mm thickness kept the breaker happy, but as soon as you try to push past 12 mm, you'll see the lights flicker and risk a shutdown. So if you're planning on heavyweight metalworking on a regular basis, you'll likely need to upgrade your outlet or keep a spare breaker on hand. Next up, the actual cutting performance. The IGBT inverter technology is meant to give you a steadier arc than older transformer models, and in my tests that translated to a fairly consistent cut line on 10 mm steel. The torch's non-touch arc feature, which essentially means the electrode never physically contacts the workpiece, reduces wear on the consumables and keeps the tip from overheating. That's a tangible benefit if you're cutting multiple pieces in a single session. The consumable lifespan is noticeably longer than what you'd get with a cheaper, non-IGBT unit. I ran a quick comparison on 8 mm sheet metal, laying out 3 12-inch cuts. The CUT55P delivered a clean, 0.2 mm kerf each time, and I didn't have to pause for the arc to stabilize between cuts. For a hobbyist who wants to keep the job moving, that efficiency can shave off a good chunk of idle time. Now, let's talk about usability. The control panel is almost minimalist, just a couple of knobs for amperage and a single button to turn the machine on and off. There's no fancy LCD or preset programs, which could be seen as a downside if you're used to a menu-driven interface, but it also means there's less to figure out when you're new to plasma cutting. I appreciated the tactile feel of the knobs. You can dial in a precise amperage without having to scroll through a menu, and the machine remembers the last setting after a brief power loss. That said, the lack of a digital readout does force you to rely on trial and error when you're cutting a material you haven't worked with before. If you're the type who likes a visual readout of voltage or duty cycle, you might find that missing feedback a little irksome. Who should actually buy the CUT55P? In my view, the sweet spot is the occasional metal crafter. If you're a DIY enthusiast who needs to cut a few brackets, custom brackets for a shelving unit, or even a small automotive part now and then, this machine gives you more flexibility than a traditional hacksaw without demanding a massive workshop footprint. It's also a decent entry point for people who want to dip their toes into plasma cutting before committing to a higher-end unit that runs on 220V and costs several $1,000s. The price point, while not cheap, positions it as a mid-range option that still packs a respectable performance envelope. On the flip side, if you're a professional fabricator who needs to run production-level cuts day after day, you'll probably outgrow the CUT55P quickly. The limited power draw, the reliance on a standard 120V outlet, and the relatively modest 50 amp rating mean you'll be throttled at higher thicknesses, and you'll likely